Hi there. Hey, everybody. My name is Sara, and I'm an astrologer in Toronto, Canada. And this is my newsletter for our new moon in Pisces on February 23rd at approximately 10 a.m. Eastern Standard. All right, let's talk a little bit about this beautiful archetype of Pisces, shall we? As this new moon is sure to be a very powerful one if we're paying attention. It could also be a new moon where we float away a little bit. So it's important for us to anchor it. It's important for us to pay attention to this new moon. Pisces has a quality of dissolution, dreaminess, emotional disassociation, creativity, diffusion, nebulousness. These are all very Piscean characteristics. But the call of this new moon is something more decidedly grounded and more present than a typical Piscean energy would generally suggest. So I'm going to get into some details about that. Let us first quickly talk about Pisces, the 12th house, and Neptune, which is the exoteric ruler of Pisces. I just want to read a quick quote from Maurice Fernandez, who is a phenomenal evolutionary astrologer, and he wrote the Bible called Neptune, the 12th house and Pisces, and he's sort of a well-known authority on the subject. He says, since the sign of Pisces, Neptune, and the 12th house represent the greater forces of creation as an archetype, they represent the unknown, the mystery, and therefore what is not within our control. The way we deal with and accept the unknown is part of the evolutionary lesson. Not having control, we experience this archetype as chaotic and unsafe. However, from a Pisces point of view, since life is a holistic organism in which everything is interconnected, we need to eventually encounter unfamiliar elements and step outside our comfort zone in order to experience everything there is. So I think what he's saying there is that Pisces, inherent in the archetype, is the mystery of life and the fact that none of us really know why we're here. None of us really know where we came from. This place is kind of weird. And those of us who have a lot of Pisces or 12th house or Neptune influences in our chart experience reality a little bit differently than normal, what is considered normal. And in classical astrology, the 12th house and Pisces was associated with insane asylums. It was associated with prisons, imprisonment, being a renunciate, leaving society, going crazy, all of this stuff. And if you think about the last couple of thousand years, you'll realize that there was no real place in our society, and nor is there today a place in our society for those of us who can step outside of the norm and connect with the more, right? For those of us who are really connected to the mystery or connected to that more spiritual dimension, there's not a lot of reflection back saying, yes, thank you, you are a mystic, or yes, thank you, you are an oracle, or yes, thank you, you are a healer. That just doesn't exist. So Neptunian people or 12th house people, where the whole point is to not be a self, is to unwind the self and to come into a state of wholeness or oneness or connection with God or with the mystery or with whatever you want to call it. And sometimes that process is very chaotic. Sometimes that process is very scary, right? It requires facing into a lot of fear and a lot of, like terror, really, because you're really, what you're doing by facing into the mystery is you're facing death. You're facing your own death. You're facing your own mortality and staring it in the face. Pisces is a sign of, one of the signs of death, as are Scorpio and Cancer. But nevertheless, I'm off track. What happens to someone who is Neptunian or Piscean or 12th Houseian, such as myself, I volunteer for this, is is the reality is just so weird. Like, we're just so weird that there's just like, what else do you do with someone who's talking to guides in one hand, or experiencing life multidimensionally on another, or astral projecting over here, or talking to the angels over there? I mean, what? So we sort of shove them away. We put them in an asylum. We get them out of our space, or we shut them up, or we burn them. Well, not anymore, thank God. But nevertheless, we sort of shun this quality, right? We don't allow ourselves. Now, the parts of Pisces that are acceptable are the artistic parts, right? The dancer, who is very beautiful in Piscean, or the poet who can put beautiful words to express the soul, and who's rewarded for that, or the artist. These are Piscean qualities that are acceptable in our society. But the more magical, more spiritual qualities of Pisces aren't. So this is something I want us to consider today, because I think everybody in this community, or everybody who's following me, for God's sakes, has a little bit more of a spiritual bent. You're also all interested in astrology. So here you are. So I'm going to come at you from that angle, as usual, because this is where I like to hang out and play. So I thought I would quickly just discuss the esoteric meaning of Pisces, okay, as far as I can understand it. Now, I'm not claiming to be an expert here at all. I'm a student, so I'm just going to relay what I have learned and hope that it is accurate. Most of what I learned about esoteric astrology comes from Alan Oken, who's a teacher of mine who I've studied with personally, and also just followed for years and years. And he sources all of his information from Alice Bailey, who is the channel for the Tibetan, sorry, I'm trying to fix my camera, the Tibetan Dwal Kul, who was the originator, or the original source, for esoteric astrology. Okay, so according to Alan and Alice Bailey, you know, Pisces is an interesting signature. So let's just first of all say Pisces is the last sign in the zodiac. It's number 12. It really is the end of the line from an evolutionary perspective. You go all the way around from birth to what? Death. Birth to the end. But the end of what? Because there really isn't any end, right? So what is ending? And that kind of qualifies the meaning of Pisces and the duality of Pisces. Pisces is a dual sign. It's these two fishes that are swimming in opposite directions. And one of the fish represents the human self, that little me. And one of the fish represents that higher me, that soul self, the divine me, the Christed me. And the way these two things interplay represents Pisces. Pisces is, you know, on one hand, very, very human, and has their whole self like deeply immersed into the realm of the collective. They're very connected to the collective. They understand human suffering, human pain, human trauma, human misery, human joy, human ecstasy, human love, human fear. All of this stuff is within Pisces realm. It's why they make brilliant artists, because they tap into all of it, all the feels they can feel. And then this other part of Pisces is out of the human. They're inhuman, they're transpersonal. And they have like this weird ability to kind of like remember where they came from, right? As a 12th house sun, I can't tell you how many past lives I have just remembered and like just cycled through. Like it was like, oh, there goes that one. Oh, there goes that one. It's like there's like a rewinding that happens. Like they're like Piscean people will have different lenses on weird, but no matter what, their reality is going to be a little bit weird if you kind of scratch the surface a little bit and get underneath there and really figure them out. Now, according to Alan, there are 3 mysteries that surround Pisces, 3 main components esoterically that kind of describe the archetype. And, you know, on an essential level, Pisces is about merging the duality and becoming whole. So merging the soul and the personality and figuring out a way to make them like become a human savior or a human server, right? And the way this happens is through 3 different principles. The first one is the principle of bondage or captivity. Essentially, this is just the recognition that in order to come into a form, a soul has to come into bondage. Because what we're doing is coming from an expanded state where we are one with everything and where we're connected to the divine mind and we're connected to divine will, and we're coming into this body. And this body is rife with suffering. It is connected to a genetic lineage, a family lineage, a social lineage, a cultural lineage. It has, from the very time we're born, there is an inability to express the freedom or the purity of our spiritual state. So there is inherently in the human condition a sense of bondage. Second, there is this ability to renounce or detach from the pain and suffering of what it is to be a human, but with love, right? So the Pisces quality, like the Pisces is a really, really humanitarian energy. They have so much compassion for pain because they experience it all. They just understand it. By nature, they understand it. But a Pisces can get lost in the suffering. They can get lost in the emotion. Or at some point in their evolution, they can learn how to detach from it and how to renounce it and how to really literally renounce life. I remember when I was going through my awakening when I was younger, I went through this period of time where all I wanted to do was become a nun. I just wanted to pray all the time. That's all I wanted to do. And this was seriously what I wanted to do with my life. And I didn't know how. It was the days before the internet. I didn't know what that meant. I'd been raised unreligious, and I certainly wasn't Christian. I didn't know why I wanted to become a nun. And I certainly didn't know how to, but that's what I wanted. I wanted to renounce, and I gave up everything I owned, and I left my home, and I just left society, and I just went off on a little walkabout, a little cute 22-year-old adventure, spiritual journey. And I felt like what I was doing was renouncing society, right? Like I just been like so disillusioned by it. I was just like, no, this is not what I want. I want more. I want to be in a holy place. I want to like love God all the time. And so I was very immature at that point and clearly didn't know how to actually go through a renunciation or detachment. It was very, very like innocent. It was very innocent and, whatever. I was just living my life at that age. But now I understand that renunciation and detachment is actually a moment by moment ability to detach from the human trauma that we're all part of all the time and the pain of being in a body, and to at one point, like on one hand, accept it and love it for what it is and forgive it. But on the other hand, to not get identified with it. So like to pull oneself back a little bit from it and to see it objectively, to see it with compassion, but to see it from a distance, to see it from a more elevated perspective so that we don't get caught in it because it's samsara, it's illusion, it's maya, right? So it's not necessarily our higher truth. It's just what it is in the experience in the moment. So that's the second principle of Pisces, is renunciation or detachment. And the final principle is the principle of self-sacrifice and death. So when you renounce the lower self or like the human suffering, it's not that you renounce it, you just detach. When you see it with compassion and you love it and you detach, what happens? Well, you gradually go through this realignment with higher will, and you start to identify yourself with your soul. And then you reweave your will force into your higher self and into higher will, into divine will. And at that point, there is no death, but what there is transformation. And you sacrifice one part of yourself for another, and another part comes in. And it's like that there's like this 3-level or 3-stage evolution within this archetype that is so beautiful. And what ends up happening when your will is connected to the divine will, then you are here in service. And you guys will hear me say this a lot because this is kind of what I like to think about and what I like to practice and sort of how my reality is playing itself out. So, but this is kind of like the end game, right? This is sort of like what we're all here for, I guess. But to some degree, like we all have our own mini versions of this that we go through as we work through our evolutionary cycle, because we all have Pisces somewhere in us. We're all part of the Piscean archetype in some way and in some level. So we all go through this feeling of bondage and captivity, this renunciation and detachment, and then this ability to allow the old to die and for the new to be born. So we have to like sacrifice what we used to attach to or sacrifice what we loved before in order to really be resurrected, right? Resurrected into a higher form, into a higher state. So this is kind of the esoteric meaning of Pisces. I just thought you guys might enjoy hearing about that. One other really interesting thing about Pisces is that as it goes through this cycle, the rulership of the archetype changes from Neptune to Pluto. And Pluto is a first-rate planet. So what that means is that it's a planet that is in charge of will force, power. And when Pisces is at its most ascended, it is essentially Pisces, spirit, higher spirit, spiritual will, Pluto, right? Spiritual will. And that is the power of Pisces, is to be the human savior, here to serve the higher will, here to express it. So I thought that was kind of an interesting piece of information to share with you as well. Let us pull that back and look at our new moon. We'll try to make it personal and relevant for everybody today. But this is all going to come full circle. You're going to understand why I told you all of this in a second. Okay, so here's the picture of our new moon. We've got sun and moon sitting at 4 degrees of Pisces, and we have Mercury sitting conjunct them. I think Mercury is at 7 degrees of Pisces. Then we have, and Mercury is retrograde. This is a very important point. Mercury has gone retrograde earlier this week, and it will be retrograde until the full moon of Virgo in early March, the first week of March. So we've got Mercury, Sun, and Moon all conjunct at 11 a.m. on Sunday morning, Eastern Standard, or 10 a.m. And then they are sextiling Uranus in Taurus and sextiling Mars in Capricorn. So this stellium of Pisces is connecting and referencing an energy of like lower will and intuition or higher mind. Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury, so it's higher mind, right? So the lower mind is sitting on our new moon and our sun. The higher mind is over here, and our personal will is over here. Okay, so these things are making like a little bit of a connection. So there's an energetic theme that's arising here. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Also, what's happening is we have Chiron perfectly squaring the nodal axis. Now, I have been feeling this. Let me tell you, oh my God, I feel like I'm going to die. Honestly, I've been crying for days. And Mercury going retrograde has really helped me with that process of shedding some tears and shedding some trauma. But this Chiron squaring the nodes is enabling us to do some very deep spiritual healing. If we're listening and if we're paying attention, it is not easy, let me say that, but it's there. And then we still, of course, have our Pluto-Saturn conjunction, and Jupiter is creeping ever closer to that. So there's some other stuff going on. I'm not going to talk about, some of the other stuff, but anyway, let's get back to this new moon. So here we have our chance to anchor divine will into our body. Okay, Pisces new moon. What is thy will? Spiritual will. Connecting to personal will, to make a change on the planet or contribute in some way to the empowerment that is coming from our intuition. So we're receiving intuition about what our place is on the planet right now. Uranus and Taurus, what is our place on the planet now? How do we contribute to the planet, Taurus? We receive that intuition, we anchor it. We receive we merge that with our personal will. We merge the spiritual will with our personal will. And the whole thing comes together at this moment of the new moon. And then we pull in the Mercury retrograde energy, which is kind of like a cloak, okay? It's kind of creating a cocoon around this energy. And this is the interesting thing about this new moon, is that we have Mercury retrograde sitting right on it. And what I think this is, I don't know because it's happening in 2 days, but I think what this is creating an incubator of space, an incubation space, where we get a moment in time to stop. Mercury retrograde always requires us to stop, to go still, to connect to divine will, to connect to our intuition, to connect to our personal will and the work that has been unfolding since January from the Pluto-Saturn conjunction. And I know I've talked about that ad nauseum. I don't want to talk about it anymore, but it has to do with taking down the structures of power, the places we've given away our power on a social level, on a cultural level, on a personal level, and reestablishing our own spiritual sovereignty. So finding a new way to be. And so we're going to incubate with those questions in mind. What is my new way to be? What is my intuition telling me? And what is my higher will? What is the divine will that wants, like, how do I anchor into that? And then the Mercury retrograde gives us the opportunity to sit in reflection and to analyze and compare where the ideal is versus the real, versus the actual. And how much of a distance do we have to go? What needs to be adjusted? This is our moment of reflection. So it is in a sense pulling us backwards a little bit because there's like a retroactive, self-reflective energy. And at a new moon, we want to be kind of planting the seeds for the future. We're creating something that's starting this next pulse of energy. So this is a complicated conflagration of archetype, right? But I think that the Mercury retrograde is giving us a chance to kind of see who we have been, to look backwards at where we're coming from, to receive the information about where we're going and what we want, and to sort of feel into what the difference is and where we're at, and to kind of really just ground it in somehow, so that we know it and we see it and we hold it, and that's it. And I feel like it's not necessarily a moment of action, right? But yet a moment of receiving and reflecting, okay? Because there's a whole lot of action coming. We're heading into Aries season. We're heading into a whole new pulse, a whole new zodiacal year. Right now is more of an anchoring and a holding, okay? And kind of like a declaration or a meditation on what is for us, where we've come from and where we are, and what matters, what we believe. So what our intuition is telling us and what our will force, what our plan is going to be. Okay, I'm like beating a dead horse right now. I've got to stop. It is so Mercury retrograde. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself again and again and again. I sincerely hope that this video has made sense to you, and that you're going to get some value out of it, because this is a very nebulous time. As I said, I've been like literally sobbing and crying at the drop of a hat for days and days, and I had to lift myself out of my emotional body in order to have this conversation with you. So, but part of what's important to remember about the esoteric nature of Pisces, and thanks to Alan Oken for reminding me that this morning when I read his Facebook post on Pluto, is that with Pluto as the esoteric ruler, it really is about kind of lifting out of the astral soup and the astral fog that Neptunian people can get in. Like, we can get into like some serious la-la land and some serious emotional woo, right? And we can disappear into like TV, and we can disappear into addiction, and we can get really lost, and we can get very, very subjective and very dreamy and very disassociated. And that Pluto energy, if we want to really do Pisces at a higher level, is very direct. It's very in alignment, and it's very focused. It's will, spiritual will. So I'm going to leave you with that, and I hope you have a great new moon, and I hope to see you again soon, either at the full moon or at our next new moon of Aries. Thank you, everybody. Bye.